All right, 7 o'clock. Are we good to get going then?
Sure.
All right. All right, so thank you for coming to listen to this presentation of recent research AAL has conducted at the Morgan-Monroe State Forest in 2020. This presentation summarizes research conducted with support from the Historic Preservation Fund Archaeology Grant. Presenting tonight, you will see Carson Wright, a graduate assistant with AAL, and I am Sarah Kurczewski, the project archaeologist at AAL. Thank you to the AAL staff that contributed to this project, including Sean Conklin and Aaron Powers, who supervised much of the field work, Kevin Nolan, the AAL's director, and Chris Thompson, the assistant director, who have worked tirelessly to complete the project's deliverables and ensure a high quality research. Thanks also to the undergraduate research assistants at AAL who helped conduct field work, process and analyze and catalog artifacts, take photos, and aid in a variety of other tasks that culminated in the successful completion of this research, its reports, its deliverables, and this presentation. And thank you to Carolyn Heston, an invaluable member of the AAL team who handled logistics and made mobilization for fieldwork not just possible, but smooth. Our presentation is about 45 minutes and we will have time for questions at the end. If you have any questions as we go, please type them into the chat or save them for the end, and we will answer the questions during the Q&A portion of the presentation. This presentation is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. So.
Hello, my name is Carson Wright. I'm the graduate student who worked on this project. Before beginning, we'd like to make some acknowledgements. So we'd like to formally acknowledge and thank the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Fund for the grant award and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology and all their help for grant administration. This allowed for us to identify, research, and analyze historic properties and cultural resources in Morgan-Monroe State Forest. Before getting started, we'd like to make a little disclaimer. Site locations are confidential in Indiana to protect archaeological resources. Those sites will be discussed, but no images of these sites will be represented in this presentation. For a quick overview of Indiana archaeology, it is illegal to surface collect artifacts on private property without the landowner's permission, or if it's on state or federal land. It is also illegal to dig with the intention of finding artifacts even on your own property without a state-approved plan by a qualified professional archaeologist. If you do happen to locate an archaeological site, report your findings to Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology, DHPA, to ensure that the sites, landowners, and Native American cultures are protected. Before we go more in depth about archaeology in Indiana, we have some terminology that is important to highlight. An artifact is any portable object that is made or used by humans, which can be indigenous, pre-contact, or historic. And we collect anything that could be over 50 years old. A lithic is an artifact made of chipped stone, and that stone is usually chert or flint. And examples of this would include arrow or spearheads. A diagnostic artifact is an artifact that can be dated. And a feature are the remains of non-portable human activity. If you look at the images on the right, the big stone structure on the bottom is part of a feature. Picture above on the top left, we have core fragment, which would be a lithic. And next to it on the top right, we have a diagnostic piece of historic pottery. Continuing on with an overview of the terminology, we have a special notation for our sites following the Smithsonian trinomial nomenclature. This site is the location where the artifacts are found, and to differentiate between these sites, each is given a unique ID using a nationwide numbering system that you can see pictured here. The 12 stands for the state of Indiana. Each state is numbered alphabetically, in which Indiana is the 12th state. MO stands for the county, which in this case would be Monroe County. And then lastly, 1685 states the number of the site. So to read this accordingly, site 1685, found in Monroe County, Indiana, is the 1,685th site located. This project received $49,999 in grant funding from the Historical Preservation Fund grant and was matched 30% by Ball State with a total of 3,000 staff and student hours. This project consisted of 22 field days between June 2020 and March 30th, 2021, in which 2 areas were surveyed. All the deliverables for this project are due June 30th, 2021. A series of tasks and deliverables are provided to the DHPA and to the public. We first conducted a field survey, then a technical report is submitted to the DHPA. Following that, an article is published in an open access journal of Indiana Archaeology, which is accessible to the public. Additionally, all the sites are entered into SHARD, which stands for the State Historic, Architectural, and Archaeological Research Database. This includes all the sites located throughout Indiana. And then lastly, a presentation on the project is given before the end of the grant timeline, which is what we are currently doing. The goals of this project are to document pre-contact and historic cultural resources, fill in gaps left by previous research, provide data for future resource management planning to be used by the Morgan-Monroe State Forest, and verify 2 Civilian Conservation Corp camps, and lastly, to provide additional interpretive information to the Indiana Department of Natural Resources and Division of Forestry. I'm going to hand it back to Sarah.
The lands of the Morgan-Monroe State Forest span Baker and Washington Townships in Morgan County and Washington and Benton Townships in Monroe County. The state of Indiana began acquiring lands that would come to make up the Morgan-Monroe State Forest in 1929, just as the Great Depression began. Most of the lands that are now part of the state forest were acquired between 1929 and 1932. Prior to the arrival of Euro-American settlers in the early 1800s, the land supported old-growth forest and was occupied by American Indians. The lands that now compose the Morgan-Monroe State Forest were occupied from the Paleo-Indian period until, which is around 10,000 years ago, through the Proto-Historic period, which is marked by Euro-American expansion and displacement of American Indians. Per treaty maps, this region was the homeland of the historically known Miami, Delaware, and Potawatomi, the homelands of the Kickapoo, the Shawnee, and the Wyandot, and the Ottawa were also near what is now the Morgan and Monroe counties. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, these lands were used for various agricultural, pastoral, and manufacturing purposes. For example, by the mid-1850s, J.K. Sharp owned significant land holdings in Morgan County in the northeast corner of what would become the Morgan-Monroe State Forest. Sharp was involved in several manufacturing operations on these lands, including lumber harvesting, a grist mill, and leather manufacture. He operated a grocery store, a hotel, and a boarding house to support his workers in the town of Monroe Mills. The community received its post office in 1871 and is known historically as Sharpstown, or as known locally as Sharpstown. The lands were intensively and extensively logged. Lumber was sold and used to build on the land. Bark from chestnut and white oak trees was used for tannins in the local tanneries. Fruit trees and crops were cultivated, and forest growth on the land too steep to cultivate were used for grazing livestock. However, the land was not conducive to such intensive farming, logging, and grazing, and by the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, the land now occupied by the Morgan-Monroe State Forest was devastated by these practices. The Great Depression began in 1929, compounding the financial woes of families trying to eke out a living on the depleted former old-growth forest land. Many people abandoned the land, leaving their homes. The lands were purchased by the state of Indiana, who saw their potential for rehabilitation, well-managed logging activities, and recreation. Rehabilitation was thanks in large part to a New Deal initiative known as the Civilian Conservation Corp, or CCC. The first CCC camp in Indiana were established in Martinsville in May of 1933 for work in the Morgan-Monroe State Forest. Within the first 100 days after taking office, President Franklin D. Roosevelt instigated many economic recovery initiatives in reaction to the Great Depression as part of the New Deal. One such effort, the CCC, hired single young men to help with conservation efforts in the nation's natural resources. The formation of the CCC was vital to the recovery of the Morgan-Monroe State Forest lands, and the Morgan-Monroe State Forest hosted camps from CCC companies 515, 516, and 542C. CCC camps in the state of Indiana were segregated by race, and of the 56 CCC camps throughout the state, 8 were for African Americans only. African American camps were supervised by white officers in managerial roles that did not become available to African Americans until 1936. A historic campsite that was documented in Survey Area 2 prior to our research, Site 12 MO 1083, is thought to be Camp 542C, an African American CCC camp. The other 2 camps, 515 and 516, were for whites. CCC Camp 516 and CCC Camp 542C operated in the Morgan-Monroe State Forest until the United States joined World War II in 1942. CCC Company's 515 was relocated to the Mammoth Caves National Park in 1934. The work of the CCC at the Morgan-Monroe State Forest accomplished several things. It provided work for young men during the Great Depression, rehabilitated depleted soils, and recuperated forest lands. CCC companies stationed at Morgan-Monroe State Forest planted trees, installed erosion control features, and developed infrastructure of the property. Infrastructural improvements included several roads, the Forest, Brent Creek Lake and Dam, and the Bean Blossom Lake. Companies built the CCC camps that they lived in, as well as several other structures, including the Central States Forest Experiment Station, the Morgan-Monroe State Forest Barn, the Morgan-Monroe State Forest Custodian House, or also known as the Assistant Property Manager's House, and 4 shelter houses, including Brent Creek, Scout Ridge, Bean Blossom, and Cherry Lake, respectively. The Morgan-Monroe State Forest is now the 2nd largest state forest in Indiana with around 24,000 acres. The forest comprises backcountry wilderness, 27 miles of hiking and riding trails, 3 lakes, and several campgrounds. It supports logging activities and has become an important place for recreation and scientific research from the Indiana University at Bloomington. And much of the state forest's present character stems from the efforts of the CCC enlistees.
Now I'm going to discuss the archaeological survey methods. So this survey utilized the shovel testing method, which is done 15 meters or 50 feet apart. These shovel test pits, or STPs, yield either positive or negative results based on the presence or absence of artifacts or features. Once all the shovel tests in the survey area are completed, the AAL archaeologist will designate the site boundaries. Any positive shovel tests located on the edge of the boundary are then delineated in the cardinal directions by 5 meters in order to refine site boundaries. STPs are 30 centimeters in diameter and are excavated to sterile subsoil or 50 centimeters. All excavated soil is screened through a 1/4 inch mesh, and then STPs, artifacts, and features are recorded via a Trimble GPS unit. Phase 1A fieldwork was conducted in June 2020 and March 2021 with a total of 21 field days. This project utilized an 8-person crew, and 84.47 acres were surveyed in the vicinity of 2 CCC camps. 99 artifacts were collected during fieldwork. Furthermore, 78 features were discovered and documented. While COVID made fieldwork challenging, we were able to develop and implement guidelines to keep everyone safe and keep the project moving forward. After the survey is completed, all the artifacts are then taken to the lab. The artifacts are washed and labeled to preserve the context of the artifact. This is followed by the identification, cataloging, and mapping of the artifacts as to coincide with the deliverables necessary for the DHPA and to the public. All the field paperwork is entered into a database to aid with data management. As you can see in the upper right image, individuals are examining and cataloging artifacts in our labs at AAL. The upper right image was taken prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and features artifacts, and the featured artifacts are not from the Morgan-Monroe State Forest project, but just to show the AAL lab and kind of what that looks like. And then the bottom right photo depicts a student examining artifacts from this project. Field and lab data contributed to the technical report. All the maps were made using field Trimble data and ArcGIS. Background research was conducted on soils, the surrounding environment, history of the Morgan-Monroe State Forest, and previous CCC archaeological investigations and identified sites. The field survey identified 4 new sites and 1 reinvestigated site. Our research identified evidence likely linked to the CCC camps number 516 and 542C. In addition, historic roads, features, and pre-contact lithic scatter was identified.
So from Survey Area 1, Site 12MO1684 has two components. There is a historic component, which is CCC Camp 516, and a prehistoric unknown component, which appears to be a lithic scatter. The historic component is significantly more robust and includes at least 40 features and 59 artifacts. The pre-contact component is represented by two flakes. Historic features include concrete, limestone, brick, structure foundations, paved walkways, drainage features, transportation features such as roads and driveways, and a flagpole or a flagpole base. Historic artifacts include metal, glass, ceramic, and architectural materials. These two lithic flakes were recovered from STPs or shovel test probes at 12MO1684. They were the only pre-contact artifacts documented during work, and these flakes are not diagnostic and therefore can't tell us much about the specific tool types or archaeological cultures or what time periods they were made. They were found from about 150 meters apart, and they tell us that there were people in the area of Site 12MO1684 before Europeans came to North America, but the present evidence does not suggest that this site had a substantial pre-contact occupation. The historic artifacts include 38 metal objects, 17 glass objects, and 3 ceramic objects, and 1 architectural fragment. These artifacts date to around the 20th century, and many are contemporaneous with the CCC camps. The most common metal artifact at both historic CCC camps investigated in this study was common wire nail. Common wire nails, like these on the left, were first manufactured in the 1850s and are still in use today. The pictured fragment of quarried limestone was recovered from 12MO1684 and exhibits cut marks left from quarrying or the stone cutting process. The ceramic shards were recovered from Site 12MO1684. The one pictured on the left appears to be a fragment of a porcelain insulator. Porcelain insulators were used in as early as 1850 and 1850s and 1860s with telegraphs, and their use expanded in the 1880s along with the prevalence of electric power. Porcelain insulators were largely superseded with glass insulators by around 1915. The two remaining shards may be from the same object, but they do not appear to refit. These fragments are thick, white, glazed porcelain. Both fragments are glazed on all unbroken surfaces, and the larger of the two fragments appears to be the corner of a rectangular object. Given the thickness and the material, it is likely that these fragments are from a toilet tank or toilet tank lid. By the start of the early 20th century, an efficient low tank toilet with sanitary, simple, smooth, white design would have been the preference in the United States. And this style of toilet is still in use today. A total of 17 glass artifacts were recovered from Site 12MO1684. The colorless, complete, wide-mouth glass jar featured in here has a maker's mark indicating that it was produced by the Tigard Valley Glass Company. Maker's marks can often be used to find out detailed information about the production history or antiquity of an object. The jar is decorated with an embossed arrow design along the mold seams on the sides, and the maker's mark on the base of the artifact has a T inserted into a V indicating Tigard Valley. The letters are in a serif font, which Tigard Valley only used from 1927 to 1959, and the number 875 are embossed on the left of the logo, and the number 8 is embossed to the right. And these numbers likely indicate a specific mold or a catalog code that was used by the manufacturer. This slide depicts a 1939 aerial photo of CCC Camp 516, circled in red. Several features are consistent with an interpretation that Site 12MO1684 was CCC Camp 516. 40 features were identified within Site 12MO 1684, and the features include brick paving, concrete foundations, concrete paving, concrete pieces, and that were likely part of paving or structures, concrete signpost, concrete slabs, concrete stairs, depressions, a driveway, a gravel concentration, a section of limestone and brick paving and limestone foundations, a limestone quarry, a metal tank, a ceramic pipe, retaining walls, and a structure. Historic pictures from the CCC camps suggest that CCC camp architecture was simple but highly formalized. Walkways were paved or lined with and connected with most buildings with one another. Buildings were neatly organized in militaristic fashion, and a flagpole stood the central location at the entrance or the heart of the camp compound. Enrollees slept in neat rows of tents or barracks, depending on the climate and time of year. Our research documented the flagpole base at 12MO 1684, which is surrounded by a cruciform concrete walkway. Formalized walkways surrounded the flagpoles at several other CCC camps. For example, a CCC camp that was located in Gibbonsville, New York, exhibited a cruciform walkway around the flagpole that is very similar to what was observed at 12MO 1684. Other concrete features were less well preserved and could be part of pavings, stairs, structures, or other camp infrastructure. Here is an example of a concrete paving at the site. Metal objects featured in this slide, the metal object featured in this slide is a large metal tank. This feature is located just north of the driveway feature that was original to the CCC camp. It is relatively isolated, which is conducive to the storage of something that is potentially combustible, such as fuel. In addition, it is relatively close to roads and driveways. Taken together, the context may suggest that this tank was used for fuel. Most of the western edge of the camp was supported by retaining walls. The terrain was steep, and walls helped to protect camp infrastructure from erosion. Walls were made of dry stacked limestone, such as the one featured here. Sign footings like these were observed at the north end of the site along the road, and they may have once supported a sign for the CCC Camp 516 while it was in operation. Also located in the north end of 12MO 1684, a limestone quarry was identified by pieces of living limestone and shaped or partially shaped limestone blocks around a waterlogged depression. The CCC camp built at least 11 structures in the Morgan-Monroe State Forest that incorporated local limestone in the foundations and fireplaces. Perhaps limestone from this quarry was used by the CCC camp or CCC for some of these structures. The best preserved structure documented during this research is located at the far southern end of Site 12MO 1684. This feature consists of a concrete structure with 2 rooms and a limestone wall surrounding it. This structure may be represented in a 1939 aerial photo, and it is known to be associated with CCC Camp 516. In summary, for Site 12MO 1684, this site includes a historic camp component and a prehistoric unknown component. The site is 9.98 acres in size. The historic camp includes several relatively well-preserved historic features and artifacts that date to the early 20th century, and the historic and archaeological research strongly supports that this historic camp was CCC Camp 516. CCC enlistees, including the men who lived at this camp, contributed to projects in the Morgan-Monroe State Forest. The prehistoric unknown component of this site consists of 2 pre-contact flaked stone tools or lithics artifacts, and these flakes are not diagnostic of any tool type that we can associate with a specific culture or time period. The present evidence does not support that the pre-contact occupation at 12MO 1684 was very robust. Now back to Carson.
All right, I'm going to discuss Site 12MO 1685 and Survey Area 1. So Site 12MO 1685 was recorded as historic unknown. This site is represented by at least 10 features, including a cistern, a concrete footer for a fence or sign, concrete slabs, depressions, a fence and its posts, a metal pipe, earthen pits, and metal refuse. Only 2 artifacts were recovered from Site 12MO1685. Both were machine-made bottles, glass bottles dating to the 1930s. The bottle featured here has an Owens, Illinois maker mark on the bottom. Near the maker's mark, there is a plant code of 6, a date code of 4, and a mold code of 17. These numbers indicate this bottle was made at the Owen, Illinois plant located in Charleston, West Virginia for mold number 17. From 1940 to 1943, the Owens, Illinois Glass Company used a dot to the right of the date code to indicate the decade of 1940. For example, a date code of 1 followed by a dot would indicate 1941. The dots were often hard to recognize because of the texture on the bottom of the bottles, or they were forgotten during manufacturing. Therefore, after 1943, the dots were replaced with a 2-digit code. No dot is apparent on this bottle. However, it could be obscured by texture on the bottles, on the bottom of the bottle. The date code has 1 digit, so it dates to before 1943. The Owens, Illinois Glass Company began in 1929. The date code indicates a date ending in 4. Therefore, this bottle dates to 1934. 10 features were identified within Site 12MO1685. At least some features may predate the CCC camps and the establishment of the Morgan-Monroe State Forest. Joseph K. Sharp purchased significant land holdings in and around the area that is now the Morgan-Monroe State Forest during the mid to late 19th century. By 1870, he operated 470 acres of agricultural land for manufacturing and 2,500 additional acres of non-agricultural land for raw materials for manufacturing. Sharp's business operations included sawmills, grist mills, cabinet makers, shingle makers, slaughterhouses, tanneries, shoemaking, saddlers, and smith. 2 earthen pits were documented at Site 12MO1685 that might relate to the manufacturing operations in the region. One of those pits featured here is a round earthen hole with a flat bottom and no associated architectural material. A historic cistern or a tank for storing water was documented close to the earthen pits. The cistern was made from poured concrete. Water is integral to the tanning process. Therefore, it is possible that the earthen pit features were associated with tanning. A historic tanning operation is known in the vicinity at Sharpstown. However, it should be noted that the pits do not appear to be very consistent with local historic descriptions of the size, shape, or construction of tanning pits at the industrial level. A metal waste dump was documented at the western edge of Site 12MO1685. The metal debris included metal watering cans, metal drums, and strips or bands of metal. These materials were likely dumped at this location from CCC camp number 516. The watering can appears to be of a style that dates to the 1930s, when the CCC camps would have been in operation. They are stamped with the number 12 on the spout or top and appear to be made from galvanized steel. This feature is located on a slope near a stream bed. Site 12MO1685 is a historic unknown site consisting of at least some features that date to the early 20th century and are likely contemporaneous with the CCC camps. This site is 1.81 acres in size. It is possible that the other features were from the 19th century manufacturing operations in the region. Only 2 artifacts were recovered, and both were machine-made glass bottles that date to the early to mid-1930s. And I'm going to hand it back to Sarah.
All right. Moving on to Survey Area 2, Site 12MO1083R1. This project reinvestigated a previously documented historic campsite at 12MO1083R1 within Survey Area 2. This site consisted of 28 features. Features included artifact deposits, a metal barrel, concrete blocks, foundations, markers, and slabs, concrete slabs to be specific, a depression, limestone walls, limestone pieces, a road, concrete structures, and a ceramic pipe. 35 historic and no pre-contact artifacts were recovered from Site 12MO1083R1. The historic artifacts included glass, ceramic, and metal. Featured here, a cache of complete colorless glass bottles were recovered from around 20 meters north of the main historic road into Site 12MO1083R1. The cache included 2 half-pint and 3 full-pint alcohol bottles. All of these bottles were undecorated, flat, and rectangular in shape, roughly flask style. All 5 bottles were embossed with the words "Federal law forbids sale or reuse of this bottle." 2 bottles had ball maker's marks on the base, and the other 3 bottles had a Fairmount Glass Works maker's mark. The embossed federal warning label was required on alcohol bottles from 1935 until 1964, and the style of maker's mark on the ball bottles was used from 1933 to 1960. The style of maker's mark on the Fairmount bottles was used from 1933 to 1971. Given these bottles were found together in a cache associated with the CCC camp, they were likely discarded there between 1935, given the dates from the maker's marks, and World War II, when the camp went into disuse. One colorless glass Old Quaker bottle was recovered from Site 12 MO 1083 R1. This bottle was used for Old Quaker brand rye whiskey. Above the Old Quaker logo are the words "Federal law forbids sale or reuse of this bottle," and the base of the bottle is embossed with an Owens, Illinois maker's mark and manufacturer code of 56 and a date code of 5, indicating manufacture in 1935. The base is also embossed with half pint and D134, and this indicates the volume and the distiller's code, respectively. 2 ceramic sherds were recovered from Site 12 MO 1083 R1. One sherd pictured left is the base of a fragment of a whiteware cup or bowl. Whiteware ceramics were developed in England around 1810 and became popular in the United States at around 1830. Whiteware is still in production today. The other sherd pictured right was a cornflower blue salt glaze stoneware crock bowl with a picket fence motif along the rim. This bowl style was produced in at least white, dark brown, and blue salt glaze. Little information exists about this from scientific resources regarding this ware type, but similar and identical bowls are attributed to Ruckles Whitehall Pottery Works of Whitehall, Illinois. Ruckles Whitehall Pottery Works produced stoneware from 1870 until 1951. Prior to 1900, all of their stoneware was produced in Albany brown slip, and therefore this bowl may date to between 1900 and 1951. Common wire nails were the most common metal artifact type recovered from 12 MO 1081 or 83 R1, but not the only kind. So one piece of ferrous sheet metal was coated in white porcelain enamel on one surface. Because the enamel is only on one surface, it is not likely that this artifact was used as a cooking vessel or serving vessel for food. Porcelain enamel was used to coat many household and industrial objects, including surfaces, appliances, sinks, bathroom installations, hot water heaters, and so on. Porcelain enamel has been applied to ferrous metals since the Industrial Revolution. It has been applied to sheet metal since around 1900, and prior to 1930, it was necessary to apply an undercoat of blue cobalt oxide enamel before applying white porcelain enamel top coat. With the advent of zero carbon steel in 1930, the top coat was no longer necessary. Breaks in the enamel on this artifact do not appear to exhibit a layer of blue enamel, therefore it likely dates later than or to 1930 or later. 26 features were identified within Site 12 MO 1083 R1. The features include artifact deposits, a metal barrel, concrete blocks, concrete foundations, concrete markers, concrete slab pieces, concrete slabs, a depression, limestone pieces, limestone walls, a ceramic pipe, a road, and a structure. The feature on this slide was one of several concrete and limestone features associated with a ravine downslope of the camp proper. This feature is a culvert consisting of a ceramic pipe in a limestone wall that is mortared and faced with concrete. Other related features consist of limestone walls with concrete mortar located in the ravine downslope from the pictured feature. These features were likely designed to channel water from upslope and to mitigate erosion from runoff. This feature appears to be a septic tank. This feature consists of a subterranean rectangular concrete structure capped with a concrete slab with 2 square openings. one square opening. There's standing water on the interior, and the upper right image, one of the interior walls with a round hole where an input or an output baffle was installed. And the opposing baffle, pictured left on the bottom, is intact. The feature pictured right consists of a large metal barrel located downslope from 12 MO 1083R1. The barrel likely rolled downhill slope from the site proper due to erosion or disposal. And similar metal barrels can be seen in a historic photo on the left. So this is of CCC Camp 516. And metal barrels like this one were used for various purposes at the CCC camps. This is a road feature at site 12 MO 1083R1 viewed in cross-section. The road feature is relatively well preserved and would have been a main access point for CCC Camp 542C. The glass bottle cache discussed previously was found around 20 meters north of this road. In summary, for site 12 MO 1083R1, this site is a historic campsite that includes several relatively well-preserved historic features and artifacts that date to the early 20th century. This site is 8.7 acres in size, and historic and archaeological research strongly supports that this historic camp was CCC Camp 542C, one of only 8 CCC camps in the state of Indiana that was used by African American enlistees. CCC enlistees, including the men who lived at this camp, contributed to projects in the Morgan-Monroe State Forest.
All right, now I'm going to discuss Site 12 MO 1686 in Survey Area 2. Site 12 MO 1686 consisted of one feature and no artifacts. A historic dirt road feature was documented in the site. This road is likely a logging road that was established after the closing of the CCC camps. Tree growth on and around the road is relatively young, judging by tree trunk diameters. This evidence suggests that the road may still have been in use as of a decade or so ago. The road is not visible in an aerial photo in 1939. This site was recorded as a historic road. This road appears to be relatively modern and is likely a logging road. The site is 0.19 acres in size. And now I'm going to discuss Site 12 MO 1687. Site 12 MO 1687 was recorded as a historic structure. This site includes one feature and no artifacts.
One artifact.
Oh, and one artifact, sorry. Although it was complete, the glass bottle recovered from this site was not particularly diagnostic. The bottom of the bottle is marked with a 4, which may indicate a mold number. Bottle is rectangular style, screw top with a mold seam that continues from the base to the screw threads on the neck. Based on shape, closure, and manufacture, the bottle is likely 20th century. The single feature associated with this site consists of large fragments of concrete slab measuring 18.4 by 8.2 meters. This feature appears to be a structure foundation and may be contemporaneous with the nearby CCC camp. This site was a historic structure. One glass bottle found in association with this site dates to no earlier than 1900. The site is 0.32 acres in size. The concrete construction materials and method used for this feature are similar to other features at 12 MO 1083R1 and 12 MO 1684 that are associated with the CCC camp. Therefore, this site might be contemporaneous with the CCC.
In sum, our research at Morgan-Monroe State Forest documented 4 previously unrecorded archaeological sites, including an unidentified prehistoric lithic scatter, a historic road, a historic structure, and a historic unknown site, and a historic camp that was associated with the CCC Camp 516. We reinvestigated a known historic camp that was associated with CCC Camp 542C. A total of 84.47 acres were investigated across 2 survey areas during this project. A total of 78 features were documented and 99 artifacts were recovered during this project. All documented features were historic, and 97 of the artifacts were historic and 2 were pre-contact. This presentation summarizes recent archaeological research that AAL conducted in the Morgan-Monroe State Forest and shares some of the results of this work. In addition, AAL produced a technical report resulting from this work that provides the environmental, archaeological, historical, and archaeological context for this work and its the research methods used and the results that were derived from them. All of these aspects of the research, as well as some of the summaries and conclusions covered in the report, are discussed in this presentation as a way to bring this research to a public audience. In addition, AAL is producing a journal article for publication in the journal Indiana Archaeology, which is accessible to the general public as well as professional archaeologists. Public education and presentations are an important aspect of AAL's mission. In September of 2020, Ball State University's Applied Anthropology Laboratories, or AAL, took part in an annual Indiana Archaeology Month activities held virtually due to COVID-19 pandemic, and we created a 21-minute video including a history of Morgan-Monroe State Forest, a review of our project goals, detailed discussion of our field methods, and an interview with one of our field crew members, and preliminary results. The video is available on YouTube, and the link is on the slide shown here. Also feel welcome to contact AAL for a link to our videos, and the video was also distributed by DHPA as part of their Indiana Archaeology Month marketing efforts. On February 18th, 2021, a virtual AAL open house was held in collaboration with World Anthropology Day. The goals of the open house were to showcase current projects that include student involvement, encourage additional student involvement, and invite potential community and professional collaborators to view our work and in-process projects. The focus of the Morgan-Monroe State Forest FY 2020 Historic Preservation Fund Grant exhibit was to make the public aware of our research at Morgan-Monroe State Forest. The virtual AAL open house was held via an online story map, and again, please feel welcome to contact AAL for a link. The Morgan-Monroe State Forest portion of the story map included an overview of the project and a video made for the Indiana Archaeology Month. Back to Carson.
And in closing here, we have some thank yous. So thank you to the Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology for the support during this project. Thank you to AJ Arns and Heather Zengler with the Morgan-Monroe State Forest for all their help during fieldwork and research report writing phases of this project. In addition, we very much appreciate the on-site summer lodging. Thanks also to the Ball State University sponsored projects administration with all their help with grant management. This project was funded in part by a grant from the U.S. Department of Interior, National Park Service's Historic Preservation Fund, and was administered by the Indiana Department of Natural Resources Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology. So a big thank you to both of them. And now I would like to open it up to comments and questions. So feel free to unmute yourself or type the comments in chat, and we will get to those and address those. Thank you.
Thank you, Carson and Sarah. That was very well done. Appreciate the overview. We've got some questions in the chat already. Do you guys see those?
Yeah.
Do either of you want to take them, or do you want me to go ahead and take the first one?
Yeah, if you want to take the first one.
Okay. So we've got a question of why is there any archaeological interest in a CCC camp? And I think this kind of gets to a broader issue of why do historic archaeology? We have documents, we have photographs, but there are things that are missing from those documents. And so generally this is just an example of how historic archaeology can be a useful supplement to tell meaningful stories or to investigate meaningful stories. about the past that aren't captured in often biased written records of a particular period. So particularly in this case, one of the things that we were looking at is to see whether or not there were material differences between the African-American CCC camp and the white CCC camp. And there are some notable differences, and at least the material remains. We're not necessarily with this survey able to say exactly the reasoning for that, but it is suggestive of differences in how those camps were provisioned and the affordances that were made by the program based on the race of the enrollees. So that's the short answer. And then the really brief answer, the even briefer answer is because it was on the priority list for the HPF program.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point to kind of broad view, but ancient Egyptian texts, they used to report the winning of wars before the wars were even done. So the historic versions of things, we tend to tell the stories that we want to tell, and that doesn't necessarily tell the whole picture. So archaeology can definitely enrich the historic view. Let's see what else we have here. So could the waterlogged depression be a sinkhole? Is this the quarry area? And it's geologically, I am not sure if that's I mean, does it, Kevin, Chris, Carson, do you want to weigh in on this? I would have.
I'm not sure which depression. Well, he says the quarry. So the quarry, no, that's not. I mean, it may have taken advantage of a sinkhole. We didn't send anybody in there to swim to the bottom and find out. But no, that quarry it was excavated, and so that particular feature is not a sinkhole. But there certainly are sinkholes in that part of the state, and there very well could be sinkholes in the area, and that were used for hazards.
Oh, and it looks like for anyone who's interested in it, the link to the story map for the AAL open house is in the chat. So please make sure to check that out. Let's see. Oh, sorry, got a cat. Okay.
Are there any other? Oh, sorry. Somebody, Malia wanted to see if AJ or Jack wanted to comment about how this fits into the forest mission. I don't know. Are they on here?
I don't see them on.
I'm on here. Yes.
Oh, okay.
It just doesn't show as AJ.
Well, go ahead.
One way that we'll take this information is because more than just the CCC camps were looked at. One is to learn more about the camps themselves, but the other one is to learn more about the area in general. And if there are sites in those areas that we need to be able to avoid, or if we can do some interpretation of those sites in more detail for the public. That's in a nutshell, at least.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, AJ. I kind of wanted, since I saw you and Jack were both on here, I thought, it kind of an answer, a side note answer to the, why are we interested in CCC camps? And I think Kevin mentioned that this was a priority area identified for the HPF evaluation criteria. And of course, we worked with the divisions, the landholding divisions, to identify areas that they were interested in getting some survey information about. And so just as, kind of a broader look at that, at someone's earlier question about, what's the interest in these areas is, it's not just archaeological, it's also, for the landholding divisions to understand what they have, what potential archaeological or cultural resources they have on those properties, whether or not they need to be aware of them for management or mitigation, or as AJ said, if there's opportunities to provide that information to the public and interpret it in ways that people might find more interesting. I certainly didn't know that there was CCC camps at Morgan-Monroe until we got the application, and wasn't aware that one of them was an African-American site, or an African-American camp. So, there's a lot of different kind of interests and missions coming together in the project. So that's why I thought maybe AJ could at least comment from her point of view, how this is useful to them as well.
Yeah, and the one reason we're always very interested in the CCC camps, in part because particularly at properties like Morgan-Monroe and Jackson, Washington, that was the start of the state forest properties there. So that helps us to understand the history of the properties and what the properties went through in landscape scales, as well as just the individuals there. So that's one reason we're always very interested in the CCC camps. Most of our structures are built by CCC, and the internal structures of the roads are, most of them were laid out by the CCC. So it all kind of revolves around understanding the history of the property and the history of the landscape and the changes that have made over the last century.
If I could add something, one of the things we did kind of purposefully when we wrote their proposal is we picked 2 large sets of acreage. So it was 30 acres apiece for the 2 survey areas, and they both kind of expanded based on AJ's input in the landscape. But we wanted to make sure we identified the full extent of these sites and just didn't hone in on maybe the most exciting parts, but to kind of get the full picture. And so from my perspective, reviewing some of the stuff that came back from the field, sometimes the stories that aren't the most well-known stories tend to be the most interesting, because it gives you a fuller picture of how they might have lived and how they did there. And it was kind of amazing when you think about it. It's kind of amazing program that all those young men lived down there and built this park and built where they lived. And I think hopefully that's helpful to the Division of Forestry and AJ.
So we have a question. Do you see any parallels or differences between the role of the CCC and the Job Corps? So in the course of this research, I'm definitely more familiar with the CCC, but just as a quick, I would say that the Job Corps' aim seems a bit more open-ended, a bit broader, whereas the CCC was targeted towards the rehabilitation or the preservation of natural resources throughout the United States. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I don't know the history of the Job Corps and if it's something that goes back or is related to New Deal. I'd have to look into that more, but also just kind of the scope of the CCC seems complementary in some ways, or like there's the goals of federal programs aimed at putting people towards good work, but that the CCC is a little bit more limited in its temporal scope too, since it kind of concluded with the beginning of the war effort and the U.S. entry into World War II. Sorry, I can't give a more detailed. Okay, so the Job Corps goes back to only the great. Okay, LBJ. Okay, so yeah, yeah. Those are, yeah, that's about as much as I feel I could speak without doing a little bit more research on the Job Corps. Sorry about that. Are there other questions?
You mentioned seeing on the Camp 516 that you encountered like brick walkways and concrete walkways. Did you see that at the other CCC camp as well?
It was definitely better preserved at 1684 than it was at 1083 R1. There just seemed to be a significantly greater number of features, a little bit more infrastructure at 1684. So that would be in Survey Area 1 versus Survey Area 2, essentially. So there were things that could have been that, like the approximately a meter sized flat pieces of concrete slab, and so it's possible, but the infrastructure was definitely more robust at 1684. And there was things that were noticeable and like identifiable in the photos. It's like, oh yeah, this is a walkway, especially around the flagpole base and that image there. So kind of like stemming from that, you could see how some of these things aligned a little bit. So
I think that the differences between that infrastructure, I think if I'm remembering the photos correctly, there are some aerial photos from the 30s, and you can, like the one that was showed in the presentation, you can very clearly see the one in Survey Area 1. And you can see buildings, you can see the entire layout of the camp, the forest is cleared. And in the other one, in the area of the other site, you can't really make out any modification to the forest canopy. And so it seems very possible that there were very real differences between how those camps were provisioned with infrastructure. And the thing that jumps to mind as an explanatory thing is who the enrollees were and the reason for them segregating the camps.
I was gonna ask the same thing, Kevin, is whether or not the level of infrastructure and development may have been attributable to one camp being for African Americans and one camp being for Caucasians. So that's interesting. I don't know how much research could be done on that, but that's certainly an interesting perspective to look into.
Yeah, I mean, based on what the stuff that we've looked at and especially the observations in the field, that jumps to mind as the most likely thing. I mean, it'd take more investigation of the flat landform that the African American camp is on to see if there's been more recent activity that would have degraded that infrastructure and led to lack of preservation. But even that contemporary aerial photograph doesn't seem to show the same level of resources dedicated to the African American one.
Yeah, for sure. It's cleared, so you can see the roads and some of the infrastructure, but it's definitely sparser and it's more spread out. I was just looking for the aerial photo for Survey Area 2, the historic one, but couldn't find it that fast.
AJ, are you aware of anything that has happened more recently historically that would have impacted the preservation of that the southern camp?
Not any more than the other one. The only thing I had wondered about previously, and you said that both camps went to the start of the war, that maybe one hadn't gone on as long as the other, so infrastructure wasn't quite as developed on it. But if they both went for the same length of time, that doesn't seem to be the cause of it then.
Yeah.
There has been harvest in the area, but I believe all of them had avoided the camps at least anything in my memory in the last 30, 40 years.
Sorry, it's Malia again. I know we're running kind of close to an hour, but I did have one kind of final question. So those like metal trash pits and things, you know, sort of dump sites that you were finding, did you like remove all of those artifacts? And I mean, just from an environmental point of view, is it okay to leave that stuff there once it's been documented?
We didn't collect like the metal artifacts, the cache of metal refuse in 1685, I think, kind of in what you're talking about. So like the watering cans and the kind of strips of metal and what looked like an old food can, like huge food can potentially. And excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. No, we didn't collect that. And as far as the environmental kind of implications and impact, I'm not really sure. You know, hypothetically, if those things have been there now for 80, 90 years. So like as far as continued impact, I don't know. I mean, Kevin, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I don't have any good answers other than, you know, there are other, especially with these large architectural features, you know, the function is the forest is aware of them, and so these are, I mean, those holes out in the middle of nowhere in the forest are, well, not nowhere, but you know, not marked. That's is something that is a management issue in terms of the property, and so going forward, that can be incorporated into how that space is managed. And you know, we're not doing the environmental assessment as to the environmental impacts, the soils impacts, the heavy metals impacts of the artifacts and the features that are still out there. Yeah. But I mean, those are things that now at least are documented to exist.
And if I could add, like if AJ or any other part of the forest, if they wanted to go pick those up, I mean, we could share our GIS data and they would have the exact location of those things. So like Kevin said, they're aware of them and we have the exact location if something, you know, needs to or wants to be done with those. And I was going to address the last, well, it doesn't have to be the last question, but the last question in the chat. Wasn't this part of Indiana a hotbed of KKK activity in the 20s and 30s? I would say it's a fairly, and Kevin can disagree because we have another project that kind of deals with this. I can say that all or most of Indiana was pretty much a hotbed of KKK activity in that time period. So I don't personally know if Morgan-Monroe counties was any more or less, but there was a lot of KKK activity in Indiana during that time period.
Yeah, I'm not specifically aware of anything that from the time that notes this as a better or worse area. It was a pretty widespread issue.
And there was one, there was a colored CCC camp that worked part of the time in Jay County, which would be northeast of Muncie. And they had an issue where basically the townspeople weren't happy that the African American camp was there, and they you know, basically beat up one of the camp enrollees who was walking through town. So there were instances of, you know, violence and that type of thing, you know, due to that attitude during that time period.
And since Chris mentioned it, I put a link to, we have the other project is with Historic Preservation Fund funds to create a virtual museum of Indiana history or history of civil rights in Indiana. And so we've got either at or close to 100 exhibits up there now that are all Indiana related sites, events, and people for related to civil rights and movement.
And I had one other question for AJ. Do you ever have, does the forest ever host reunions for the CCC camp members for either of the camps? Have they ever come back and to meet?
If they have, I have never heard about it. So it hasn't been anything recently, no.
Well, and I don't know how many, I would have to do the math. There wouldn't be many left, but I know, in the last, whatever, 20, 30 years, I know that was kind of a thing at some camps that they would have these reunions. But yes, that most of the young men would be gone by now, but I know in the, not that long ago, that was a thing.
Yeah, and I actually think Pokagon, they still host the reunion, and it's their family members are now coming back to it.
Yeah, I read that. The families, one article I read that the families were very proud of either their dads or their uncles or what have you participating in that. And so they had enjoyed the reunions as well.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting idea to look into and see if maybe we could host something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the flying chips, the newsletters that Camp 515 put out. One of them was from the era that the camps were operating, but the other one that you shared with us, AJ, was from, I think it was like 10 years later or something. So, or I guess after some of the enlistees had probably gone and come back from World War II and kind of had a reunion lap, it looked like. So, at least back when it was all kind of relatively fresh still, they seem to have come back together.
Are there, does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, well, we thank everyone for your participation tonight, and we thank Carson and Sarah for putting together a program. And again, thanks to DHPA for all their work, and AJ for all of our field workers loved the accommodations this summer or last summer, so they're going to be disappointed this summer. Kevin, you have anything else to add?
No, just I'm really glad that all of you guys came to hang out with us tonight. It's a good turnout, and I appreciate the good questions, and well done, Sarah and Carson. I enjoyed the presentation.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah,
Good
have a
evening.
good weekend.
Good weekend.
Thank you.